Hello friends, welcome to a lecture on primary education. The main objectives of our today's deliberation are to familiarize learners with the concept of primary education, to enable the students to understand the origin of primary education in India, and finally, we will try to understand the goals and purposes of primary education. Let me first of all give you a brief introduction about the concept of primary education. Primary education or elementary education in primary school or elementary school is typically the first stage of compulsory education, coming between early childhood education and secondary education. It is first stage of formal education in a range of basic subjects. It generally requires no previous formal education and is typically the beginning of systematic studies. Primary education is provided in schools where the child will stay in steadily advanced classes until they complete it and move on to high school or secondary school. Children are usually placed in class with one teacher who will be primarily responsible for their education and welfare. This teacher may be assisted by varying degrees by specialist teachers in certain subject areas, often music or physical education. It is compulsory for children to receive primary education, although it is permissible for parents to provide it. The term primary education and elementary education have been used interchangeably in India. Elementary school provides primary education for class 1st, class 8th. The children in these classes are generally aged between 6 to 14 years. Primary education is segregated as lower primary from class 1st, 5th and upper primary from class 6th to 8th. According to Kothari Education Commission, elementary education can be divided into two sub-stages. Lower primary stage, it is of 4-year duration. It is meant for the children in the age group of 6 to 10 years. Higher primary stage, it is of 3 year of duration. It covers the education of students in the age group of 11 to 13 years. The 5-year plan of India have divided the elementary education into two stages. A 5-year course for the age group of 6 to 11 years, a 3-year course for the age group of 11 to 14 years. Thus, primary education refers to first 8 years of schooling. It is the age on which the whole structure of education system is based. If the child is educated properly at the primary stage, his or her further education proceeds in a right direction. Primary education is not concerned with any particular classes or groups but has to deal with the entire population of the country. It touches life at every point and it has to do more for formation of national ideology and character than any other single activity, social, political, educational. Those of us who are concerned with the great work of primary education should therefore visualize its problems and try to eradicate them for better future of the country. Dear students, let's trace the origin of primary education in India. The story of Indian education is as old as story of human civilization. As a process, education is as old as the progression of human race. Right from evolution of human being, education began in one form or the other. Indian history dates back to the time of Indus Valley civilization. Following that, there was a Vedic age and thereafter Buddhist period and then medieval period. In Vedic period, the age of admission to students at primary level was usually between 5 to 8 years, and the student has to stay in the home of the teacher or in the boarding houses away from their own home known as Gurukul after performing a ritual called Upanayan ceremony. Education was given free. All boarding and lodging expenses were defrayed by the teacher. In Buddhist period, primary education took form of worldly or materialistic education. Children of 8 were admitted to this level after performing ceremony known as Pabbaja ritual and was imparted in monasteries, counterparts of Gurukul of the Vedic period. Monastery was a federation of individual schools, each under an acharya. According to Hyun Sang, there were 5,000 monasteries in the 7th century. In medieval period, primary education was given in maktaba, usually attached to mosque after performing initiation ceremony, Bismillah Khani for male child and Zarif Shani for girl child. Christian missionaries had come to India with an ambition of trade. They established their mission centers in different parts of the country and attached elementary schools to those centers. The modern system of education in India is generally held to have originated with the Charter Act of 1813, under which Parliament directed East India Company to accept responsibility for the education of the Indian people and to spend a sum of not less than 1 lakh a year for the purpose. Nothing was done to spend this amount for the next 10 years. In 1824, the annual grant of education was raised to 10 lakhs. Even then, no attention was paid to primary education. However, in 1831, this committee gave financial help to 9 vernacular schools in the rural areas of Sangar, and this may be considered as first step taken by the company towards primary education. According to Wood's dispatch in 1854, the British government took itself the responsibility of educating the Indian masses through the theory known downward filtration theory. In spite of taking responsibility, government did not do much in the field of primary education, so progress of primary education was slow. By 1882, the number of secondary schools had risen, but the primary education was sadly neglected. Hunter Commission was appointed in 1882 to review the condition of primary education and to suggest measures for its expansion. The commission suggested that primary education should be entrusted to the newly created municipal and district boards. The local bodies were required to set aside definite funds for primary education, and the government was asked to help the local bodies financially to the extent of 1/2 or at last 1/3 of their total expenditure on primary education. In spite of all these, there was a little progress in this field because local bodies themselves were in their infancy and had no experience of education. Even the government expenditure on primary education did not increase appreciably. In 1905, Lord Curzon, the then Viceroy of India, gave a recurring grant of 35 lakh to provincial government for helping the local bodies and private agencies engaged in providing primary education. This results in increase of both school and pupils. In 1910, Mr. G.K. Gokhale, a member of the Imperial Legislature Council, moved a resolution in the council urging the government to make primary education free and compulsory between the age group of 6 and 10 throughout the country. Hartog Committee in 1929 recommended consolidation quality rather than expansion and a curriculum related to the lives of pupils. In 1937, Mahatma Gandhi worked out his plan of universal and inexpensive scheme of primary education known as basic education. In 1945, the Central Advisory Board of Education submitted a plan for the post-war education development. This plan is known as Sargent Plan. It recommended universal, free and compulsory education for all boys and girls between the age of 6 and 14 years on basic education lines. Kothari Commission has remarked that wastage and stagnation like headache and fever are not disease in themselves. They are really symptoms of other diseases in the education system. The first and foremost program of national policy on education was free and compulsory education. Wastage and stagnation should be prevented and recommended to launch Operation Blackboard program for improving quality education. Now, let us discuss aims and objectives of primary education. Aims of education in contemporary India are indicated in the Constitution of India, which is the source of all our endeavor in all walks of life. So, the aims of education can be described as to bring about harmonious development of the child's personality by providing for his physical, intellectual, social, aesthetic, moral and spiritual needs. Physical development. Rousseau states it is the sound constitution of the body that makes the operation of the mind easy and certain. Education should aim at the physical development for normal physical growth and development in developing endurance and strength to do normal tasks of life, as well as to meet the demands of the stress of life without feeling undue strain and in maintaining and developing proper and sound functioning of organs and organic system. This can be achieved by including physical education progress at primary level, including games, sports, play, classroom activities, etc. Intellectual development. Feeling of insecurity and the feeling of inferiority are two great enemies of intellectual development. Our attempts should be to provide suitable emotional, physical and intellectual environment in which a child may have the feeling of security and the feeling of equality. He should feel that his personality is respected and given a suitable place. For this, there should be a close pupil-teacher contacts, favorable home and school environment, medical examination, provision of co-curricular activities, freedom and self-discipline. Social development. The aim of education is not to prepare an individual so that he or she lead a self-centered life, but he or she has to perform his duties as son or daughter, husband and wife, father, mother, neighbor, and as co-worker very efficiently. For social development, stress should be on group work, organization of camps, social service, equal treatment irrespective of caste, gender, etc. Aesthetic development occurs through primary emphasis on art, music, and the craft. Moral development occurs through social service, activities, and personal example of the teacher. Spiritual development occurs through morning assembly and talks on spiritual matters. Development of communication power with emphasis on language, skill, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. To prepare children for life through work, experiences, and other socially useful and production work. To inculcate a scientific temper among the learner. to prepare children for good citizenship, to develop in them a love for their country, its tradition, and its culture, to inculcate a sense of dignity of labor, development of values, honesty, non-violence, team spirit, truth, etc. Develop into a self-disciplined and healthy person. Develop awareness and appreciation of the environment. Develop ability for critical thinking and logical judgment. Now, let's have a glimpse over the goals and purpose of primary education. Primary education plays a significant role in spreading mass literacy. This is a prerequisite for establishing and strengthening of democratic order of the country. The universalization of elementary education has been one of the most important goals of education development in India since independence. It found expression in Article 45 of Indian Constitution as a directive principle of state policy. It leads under the caption Provision for Free and Compulsory Education for Children. The state shall endeavour to provide within a period of 10 years from the commencement of the Constitution for free and compulsory education for all children until they completed age of 14 years. Universalization of primary education or elementary education involves the three important stages: universalization of provision, universalization of enrollment, universalization of retention. Universalization of provision. It means that school facilities should be provided to all the children between the age group of 6 to 11 years in the country. The school be easily accessible within the walking distance of a child. We have fairly succeeded as far as this provision is concerned. Universalization of enrollment. All children between the age group of 6 to 11 years must be enrolled. For this, compulsory legislation must be passed. Under legislation, parents can be fined for not sending their children to schools. However, this provision has remained on paper only. Universalization of retention. By this we mean that once a child joins a primary school, he should remain there till he completes all 8 classes. If the child leaves the school in between, the idea of universalization stands defeated. Unfortunately, 70% of all the first admissions leave the primary school before completing it. It gives birth to problem of wastage. Mere enlistment of children is not enough. They have to be retained. Even after 40 years, this constitutional commitment has not been fulfilled. Making primary education free and compulsory for all remains a distant goal yet. There are various problems which hamper the development and expansion of primary education. Some of the problems are related to the universality of enrollment and retention. Others are related to the qualitative improvement. All these problems are discussed as under. Universalization of primary education. Increase in student population. The student population is increasing at a tremendous rate. As a result, universalization of elementary education cannot be achieved because it requires large amounts of money to open new schools, construct buildings, and provide adequate number of teachers and other facilities and amenities. As such, the dream of universalization of primary education has not come true so far. Illiteracy and ignorance of parents. Illiteracy of parents is another obstacle in the way of universalization of elementary education. Illiterate parents are not aware of the value of education. They do not send their children to school regularly. Most of the orthodox parents show resistance in sending their children, especially the female children, to school. Certain factors of history, tradition, and culture in a family are also responsible for not sending children to the school. Poverty. Poverty of parents also prevent many children from going to school. Approximately 40% of the total population in India live below the poverty line. In this sizable segment, it is ironical to note that the proportion of children in the age group of 6 to 14 years is much more than in the rest, 60% of the population. Most of the parents are not in a position to provide even 2 meals in a day to their family members. As soon as their children finish crawling and start walking in an erect posture, their parents push them in the world of work with the intention that this may increase the income and help in the sustenance of the family. A substantial proportion of school-aged children thus remain out of the portals of educational institutions. Instead of engaging themselves in reading and writing, they undertake manual jobs with their tiny structure. Problems related to qualitative improvement. Defective curriculum. The curriculum of primary education has been narrowly conceived. It lays emphasis on subjects instruction. It is more bookish and mechanical. The academic subjects taught are not related to the needs and interests of students. The subjects are lifeless and fails to inspire children. Children, through the subjects of study, are placed in a world that is different from the world of their own. Narrow objectives. Education cannot be successful unless it has definite aims and objectives. The aim and objective of existing elementary education are narrowly framed. They are confined to the teaching of 3 hours alone. Therefore, they cannot help in bringing about the harmonious development of personality. Problem of trained teachers. Most of the teachers in elementary schools are neither dedicated nor devoted. They are neither qualified nor well trained. The quality of the teachers' training program is very poor. Such ill qualified and untrained teachers are unable to understand a child and plan his education according to his needs, interests, and capacities. Inadequate facilities. Primary education cannot be consolidated on quality basis because of lack of resources. Most of primary schools suffer due to non-availability of buildings, furniture, and equipment. Inadequate teaching method. The teaching learning process in our schools is very outdated. The teachers teach in the class and the students receive it as passive learners. Students are not actively involved in teaching learning process. Students' initiative is killed and poor in approach is preferred over drawing out approach. This type of methodology is defective as it does not lead to optimum development of children. Wastage and stagnation at primary education level. There is a huge wastage and stagnation which has hindered the progress towards free, compulsory, and universal education. When a child leaves school before completion of full course of primary education, he becomes a case of wastage. And when a child fails in a certain class at primary stage and he is required to study again in that very class, it amounts to stagnation. Wastage and stagnation are the two evils which have prevented the smooth and normal progress of primary education in our country. Wastage and stagnation has been defined by Hartog Committee as under. Wastage means the premature withdrawal of children from school at any stage before the completion of the primary course. Stagnation means the retention of a child in a class for a period of more than 1 year. Stagnation has generally been measured by counting the number of failures during different years from the same cohort of pupils. So, dear students, a number of programs to achieve the goals of universalization of elementary education have been initiated by the Government of India, Ministry of Human Resource and Development, Department of Education, that is Operation Blackboard, Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalayas, the National Program for Education of Girls at elementary level, district primary education programs, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, so on and so forth. And with this, we conclude our today's lecture. Thank you.